I thought it was just another Saturday coffee on the porch, the kind of quiet that makes you believe the world is ordinary. And then Margaret Caldwell parked her SUV like a roadblock across my driveway, and everything went sideways. She didn't just stop her car, she staged it, turned off the engine, climbed out with a clipboard like she owned the place, and announced in that syrupy, small-town way that she had come to enforce neighborhood standards. That moment, the metal belly of her SUV between my truck and the street, her heels on my gravel, it felt like a line being drawn I hadn't been told about. My name's Ethan Cole, and I've lived on Willow Ridge for 8 years. I'm not a hero. I'm not a troublemaker. I run a small landscaping outfit. I fix fences. I tell bad jokes at barbecues. But I do care about my yard, and I do care about my kids' school pickup line not being turned into a battleground. Margaret and I had been in the same HOA emails for a while. She's the kind of person who collects rules and wields them like talismans. But this was different. This felt deliberate. The SUV was a message, and I could see the way neighbors peeked from behind blinds, the way Roger from next door started filming with his phone. There's a weird thrill to being watched when you didn't ask to be, like a quiet tension waiting to catch fire. She started with the rules, of course. You can't have gatherings without approval, she said, reciting from her clipboard like scripture. You can't set up structures that aren't approved. Her voice was loud enough that Cindy across the street leaned out of her window. I tried the calm approach first. Margaret, it's a family thing. Just a couple folding chairs. We'll be done by noon. Her jaw tightened like a trap. It's not about chairs, she said. It's about the rule. You know the rule. I realized then that for Margaret, rules were not neutral, they were power. For her, enforcing them was a performance. What came next was a blur of ordinary people trying to make sense of something that felt petty and then turned ugly. The sheriff's cruiser rolled in. Deputy Ruiz, a steady guy who's been on the beat longer than most of us have owned our houses. He listened to Margaret, then to me, then to the murmuring neighbors, and he said the thing officers say when both sides have a claim. Let's keep it civil. That didn't land. Margaret doubled down. She waved a paper like a flag and accused me of hosting an event that would set a precedent. Her tone had an edge I hadn't heard before, familiar, like someone sharpening resentment for a long time. Why would she do this? There are reasons under reasons. Turns out Margaret's brother had once lost a property dispute on a nearby lot. She'd watched the family she blamed for that get away with what she called sloppy boundaries. She'd been on a campaign to protect our neighborhood longer than anyone could remember, and somewhere along the way protecting turned into policing. My house became her canvas because I'd spoken up at a meeting last year about a drainage issue that washed mud into her flower beds. Small slights pile up, and in Margaret's ledger I was due for a reckoning. The crowd grew because drama is contagious. Phones out, engines idling, relief and anger tangled together. I could feel people's eyes, like a physical thing. Margaret started to shout, not at me, or not just at me, but at the crowd, at the idea of people getting lax, of standards slipping. She said things meant to humiliate, phrases like community values, and we won't let this slide. And you could tell she was feeding on the little gasps of approval from a few longtime neighbors. That's when things shifted from bureaucratic to personal. Then Roger's video caught what I still replay in my head. Margaret stepping in front of the tow truck, posture carved from righteous fury, and saying, "You will not take my car." The tow operator, this big quiet guy named Benny, hesitated. The deputy repeated warnings, "You need to step back, ma'am." Margaret didn't. She said, "This is my neighborhood." It was a private claim turned public, like an asterisk on the map. And when she reached into her coat, that's the part everyone still talks about, and pulled out a canister, the air snapped. It was pepper spray. I remember the metallic glint, and the way the sun hit the edges of the can like it was spotlighting what was about to happen. People screamed, or tried to, as the deputy moved faster than any of us. And in that instant something more dangerous than a citation showed its face. Fear. The deputy knocked the canister from her hand, and suddenly there were hands everywhere pulling, restraining, shouting, and then the surreal calm of handcuffs closing on her wrists. Margaret cursed like she'd been cut, but there was no nobility in it, just pure astonishment that the crowd had turned on her. In the hush that followed, with the tow truck hauling the SUV and the deputies guiding Margaret to their cruiser, you could hear neighbors exhaling relief, vindication, a little triumph. But there was also a strange new silence, like a pond after a rock's been tossed in. We'd all watched a small war. Some of us cheered, some of us looked away. I stood on my porch holding a paper cup gone cold and realized that victory tastes complicated. The aftermath was where the real story lived. People gathered in clumps on lawns, speaking in low voices. Cindy said she'd always been too scared to speak up because Margaret had friends on the board. Roger, still shaking from filming, said we'd crossed a line, that someone had finally stood up and said, "No, this harassment isn't normal." A few neighbors were angry that the sheriff had to get involved at all. A few whispered that Margaret had family troubles, that maybe this was less about the HOA and more about her reaching for control in a life with less of it. The point was, every action has a root, messy and human. For me, the confrontation opened up something I'd been stuffing down, all the little compromises people make to avoid conflict until something explodes. I'd been tolerating petty fines for lawn ornaments, tolerating snide emails, tolerating that clutch of people who believed authority was more important than neighborliness. That day forced a question: when does protecting a community become strangling it? And who decides when enforcement is justice and when it's performative cruelty? Judge Hale's name came up later at a town meeting. She'd been at the scene to mediate because the HOA had asked for a formal hearing. She listened to both sides, asked hard, quiet questions about intent and harm, and reminded us that rules are tools, not reasons. That line, "rules are tools, not reasons," stuck because it made the difference stark. Tools serve people, reasons serve narratives. Margaret had been serving a narrative where she was the guardian, and anyone who questioned her operations was a villain. What changed afterward wasn't instant. We rewrote some of the HOA bylaws to be clearer, to limit arbitrary enforcement, to require mediation steps before fines. People volunteered for committees they'd never thought they'd join. Roger became the unofficial neighborhood archivist, cataloging complaints so patterns would show instead of gossip. I found myself at 2 meetings a month, trying to listen more than talk, and trying to make sure our solutions didn't create new ways to hurt people. And Margaret? She filed an appeal. Of course she did. She called it an abuse of power on our part, as if being the victim of your own aggression were some kind of badge. But some mornings, when I drive past her window and see the empty space where the SUV once stood, I don't feel triumphant. I feel wary. People don't usually change overnight, and the knot of resentment she carried didn't vanish. What changed for better or worse was that we were no longer pretending the problem didn't exist. The last scene I picture is cinematic because life hands you images like that. Early evening, the cul-de-sac golden and quiet, kids on bikes wobbling through the puddles after our repaired drainage did its job, and me standing by the mailbox thinking how fragile community is. You can build fences and bylaws and you can file appeals, but the stitch that holds neighbors together is 1,000 small acts of decency. Letting someone in line, saying hi across the fence, not weaponizing a rule to win an argument. That stitch had been frayed, and that day it started to mend, but it also showed us the tear. If there's a lesson in all this, and there always is, even when it's not neat, it's that power left unchecked becomes theater, and theater hurts people. Systems need eyes on them, sure, but hearts too. We rewired a little of our system to require listening before fines, to require a neighbor review panel that includes people new to the HOA board, and to make sure mediation happens before anyone's day turns into a headline. That's not a silver bullet, but it's something. So I'll end with this. What would you have done if an SUV blocked your driveway on a Saturday? Would you have stayed silent and sipped your coffee, or would you have stepped out and said something? Where do we draw the line between keeping the peace and letting injustice pass, and who gets to decide? Drop a comment. Tell me where you stand. Tell me if you think rules should be enforced strictly or with mercy, and if you've ever had a neighbor who crossed the line. Share this with someone who loves neighborhood drama, or with someone who's been on the other side of a rules fight. I want to know all the sides.